So, could we start by talking about Andy Warhol for a second?
Yeah, sure.
And let's know, what was his influence on your life and work?
Yeah, I think it was more indirect than anything else. I mean, it was the fact that he was using a band, Velvet Underground, with his exploding plastic inevitable boo jar back in the side. What was it called? Something like that, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're being the talking head.
A nodding head.
And it was sort of by circuit that I got interested in the stuff that he was doing. From artistically, I thought it was interesting. I mean, it was a very bold step to take, what he was doing, applying design values and graphics values to serious academic art. But it really was the inclusion of Velvet Underground as part of his whole entourage team, I guess. But I didn't meet him until I guess the late 60s, early 70s, I can't remember the year. I found him it was an incongruous kind of situation. The guy was in the factory place, and it was a hive of activity. Everybody was doing something, talking up this, talking up that. And the guy was just sort of very quiet, sort of like a lethal kind of Svengali figure over this whole thing. Everything happened without his seeming to be taking any part in it. He was an extraordinary, hypnotic kind of guy.
Okay.
He was very, very funny, very witty man, but it took a long time before you got him talking.
Mm-hmm. So this is all before you wrote the song about him?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I wrote the Hunky Dory song before I met him, and then I played it to him at the factory, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's great." And that was his critique of the song. I don't know if he ever liked it or not.
All right. Let's go into the press conference today then.
Yeah.
And why this approach, these live press conferences?
Well, I tried it before in London once upon a time. I did a press conference to announce the Serious Moonlight tour. And it was such a drag. I mean, it felt so stiff, and I just didn't like being up there doing, like, just reading off dates. I just wanted to do something that was very comfortable this time, and I felt a lot more comfortable in a stage situation with the band with me and playing music. I mean, that seems sort of, hey, here we are. This is what we're like. This is what it's about. It's about music, and this is what we sound like. We're a good club band, man.
No, it's great. It's like a tour preview. I think got a lot of people excited. I mean, you're going to take this press conference thing around Europe, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what cities you're looking most forward to the most.
Well, for me personally, it'll be Madrid and Rome, because I've never played either of them. I've been to Spain, and I've been to Italy, but only as a tourist. I've never played them before, so that'll be, I think, the most exciting ones for me to do.
Okay. Now, the album seems like it's like a lot more rocking and kind of noisy than the last two, and I'm wondering if you had playing live in mind when you recorded it.
Very much so. There were two things were kind of ingredients for that whole thing. Is the Serious Moonlight period, that Let's Dance album, was Niall did wonderful things for me on that album. He created an extraordinary sound, but with the inclusion of the horns and the smoothness of the whole deal, I started to become uncomfortable in carrying on with that direction, because I felt a little lost in that, and it was approaching an area that I didn't really feel I belonged in. And so coming to this album, I approached it from how I used to feel about bands when I start. I always go back to, when you get lost, you go back to point one. And so I approached the whole deal from what used to excite me about being in a band, and it just goes back to the guitar again. And so it became a guitar-oriented album. And as I was writing and feeling out the material, I realized it was just a tremendous album to be touring, and so the whole thing meshed together, and I put the amount of energy that I needed in to a rock album to really make it happen on stage.
Mm-hmm. Like, how about your musical role? Because you didn't play instruments on the past two albums, and you're back to doing that.
Yeah, I've gone back to doing that, because that was an integral part of what I used to do, and it produced the kind of sound that I really felt was me, because I was playing some of the stuff on it, and I was kind of giving it some kind of foundation on either the keyboards or a particular kind of rhythm guitar that I play, which is not like Carlos's, but it works, you know. I mean, it's not great, but it works. And so I wanted to kind of return to that. So I was happy to be. It was nice to be back in the band in that way, you know.
I mean, was this one of those albums where you left a lot up to the band, or was it very much directed by you?
No, it's very, very structured, this one. I mean, I made demos of everything before we went in, and I played them to everybody, and I said, I want it to sound exactly like this, but better. Because I played everything. I programmed drum machines, and then played bass and guitar, keyboards, and synthesizer parts. I did the whole deal on the demos. And then I played the demos to Carlos and Erdal Kazilke, who's the drummer and the bass player and the synthesizer player and the trumpet player and the string player on that album, and Peter. And I said, this is where I'm going. That's the approach I want. And the demos are not dissimilar from this final album, except of course it's played much better.
Mm-hmm. How did Frampton get involved in this album?
He and I go back an awful long time. As I mentioned earlier, we went to school together and all that. He was younger than me. He was about, let's see, he must have been about 12, 13 when I was 15. And he was only at the school a short time because his father was at the school and he was my art master. And I think it was pretty tough on Pete having, as it is for any kid if his father's the teacher at the school, you know. So he eventually left that school and went on to another one. But at the time, we used to, in the art block, that used to be like where all the musos hang out, you know. We used to bring our guitars to school. When we weren't painting, we were playing guitar, and he used to come in over there and play over there, and he was just dynamite. I mean, he already at 13, he was a great guitarist. And then he went on, eventually went through the Herd and the Small Faces and all that. And I kept running into him. We played with each other various times. I was supporting him one time when he was with Humble Pie, and then he supported me at another time on another gig. And all the way through, and I saw this dreadful stuff happening to him in the 70s. I mean, it was all getting lost that he was a great guitarist. He was suddenly a pop hero, and then he was a face, and the camera just moved up from the fingers right up here, you know, and it was this all the time. And he hated that. And I know how he felt about that, because sometimes my songwriting got lost along with, you know, but that was probably my fault, because I was pushing everything else so hard, theatricality and all that. And then last year it became apparent that Peter was really back on the trail again and with the Stevie Nicks tour, and really wanted to play. And I thought, gee, that's the guitarist I'd really like to work with on this next album, because he is great. And I'll give him a call, and I gave him a call, and he said he'd love to do the album. And whilst we were doing the album, the inevitable thing came up, and he said, are you taking this stuff on the road? And I said, yeah, do you think you want to come with it? You know, and he said, yeah, it'd be great. And I said, you don't mind just being in like the band? He said, no, I'd love to do it. And so it really gives him a chance to showcase his talents as a guitarist. And then inevitably he'll go out on his own next year. And with a bit of luck, people will know him for what he is, which is a great guitarist. Mm-hmm. And a very good songwriter and singer, as it happens. But it'll bring his guitar playing back into the forefront.
I mean, what is it about his playing? Melody, what?
It's a good combination of this. Because his musical background is very similar to mine, there's a sort of an English R&B awareness with all the R&B stuff that he used to play. So there's a contained roughness about his playing, which I like very much. And
we're going to have to do that one over, but if we could do it over and also include Peter's name in the answer.
Oh, sure.
It'll establish.
Yeah, I understand. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
So thanks, phone.
Doesn't disconnect, so I mean, I could grab the rest of the cable.
No, we don't need to resort to those.
Is a cigarette going to break up continuity?
No, please.
Thank you.
An ashtray.
Dying for one. When you start singing, you really have to keep smoking, you know, or it all goes.
Tell your voice.
Do you need that? Do we do a number with that, or? No, all right. You guys, out of interest, you guys don't have a problem with the video, do you?
No,
the day in, day out
the world premieres tonight.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. I was really taken aback, frankly, about that other deal.
Cool. Now we're getting food, too. Yeah, let's pick up with Frampton again and
yeah, sure.
what it is about his playing that you like so much.
Peter's playing owes a lot to the rhythm and blues influences that we all had back in England in the 60s. But it's an English approach to the blues, you know. I mean, it produced the Claptons. I mean, that some of the very best blues guitarists, in fact, came out of England. And I always thought that Peter was one of them. And he just got lost along the way, along with, you know, where Beck was making a reputation, Clapton and all the others, and nothing really happened for Peter apart from that the voice box thing. And it's the kind of guitar playing that I've always really felt happiest with. Ronson was the kind of guitarist I liked working with, because it was about American music, but it was played with an English approach, and that's really what I like about Peter's playing. He's also incredibly open to ideas, and I dare say that I'll be working with him on all kinds of new approaches to what we can do with his guitar style on my material, anyway.
Okay, great. Let's get into the Day In, Day Out video.
Yeah.
Now, what was the idea behind it?
The subject matter generally, if I can preface that with the subject matter generally on the album, seems to be split between personal romance, personal feelings of love, and some kind of statement or indictment of an uncaring society, on particularly the response to what's happening in major cities in terms of the homeless, people who are just totally uncared for in terms of education or being fed properly or being housed properly. There's such a diversity of political stance now, where the high power authorities seem to be far more concerned about the relations with Russia or the Middle East, and the whole idea of what's happening at home on the streets with the indigenous population seems to have been swept under the carpet. I'm not consciously prolific in terms of didactic statements. I mean, I would leave that very much to the Clash kind of band, or Dylan, or the way that Lennon would work with his songs. My things tend far more towards an impressionistic, almost surrealistic approach to statement. But that's the body of the album, and that's the kind of the sense I was trying to get over on it. And Day In, Day Out particularly dealt with the idea of somebody in a prejudiced position, in a position where there doesn't seem to be any kind of hope. It's impossible to make any money. It's impossible to get a good education, and the things that people unfortunately have to resort to try and get through. And in the end, when the chips are down, everything's awful. When you think you've got to the bottom of the pit, it gets even worse, you know, and it's like there seems to be no way out from that situation. So that's kind of, does that make any sense? That's kind of my approach to that song. It really is about the effects of an uncaring society.
Now, there's two different endings in the clip?
Not that I'm aware of. As far as I'm aware of, there's one ending.
Because it's with the blocks, like in one of them it says fuck or something, one of them it says love.
Oh, yeah. We thought that was, you know, we thought we'd try, I mean, yeah, as the battering machine comes through the window, on the first version that we shot, the kid's just putting his last block in, oh, fuck, you know, like, great. After all this is really what we need. But we just knew that because of things being how they are on the media, if we expected to get the thing played at all, we put in the letter L instead, so it became luck, which is kind of almost better in a way. But I think we're probably sending both versions around, and it's really up to the stations if they want which version. Some countries like Italy and France, of course, they don't care, and they'll play the original. But America has, you know, it has its problems in that area. So, what do you do? Friday Night Video particularly have problems in that area.
Now you
because they're not used to seeing women in bras and a panty. You know.
What's that? I don't know, bras.
No bras.
So were you doing a clip with Mondina?
Yes, I did. There's a love song on the album called Never Let Me Down, which is, it's the title track, you know, and it's like real heavy romantic piece. I'm better off with that kind of stuff. And I thought he would be absolutely ideal. I'm not used to giving over my video authority to somebody so completely, because I usually collaborate intensely with whoever I'm working with on the video. I storyboard myself, I usually conceive the thing myself, and then Julian Temple, or in the past David Mallet, have worked with me on how to get the best visual on my approach to the video. But with Mondino, he works in his own, he's in another world. The guy is so French, such a romantist, I can't get anywhere near where he's at in terms of a director, so I just gave the whole thing over to him, and I put myself really in his hands in terms of that video. But it's quite beautiful, quite lovely, and it's something I could never do. I could never make anything like that myself.
Because this song is kind of Lennon-esque, almost like a John Lennon ballad, and I'm wondering what John Lennon told you about writing songs that stuck with you so much.
We talked about it. Well, the two things that I remember strongly about. Well, firstly, John, it was an extraordinary raconteur. I mean, he could tell story after story, but he was quite adroit at keeping things short and simple and cutting right through bullshit and coming straight to the point with great one-liners. He was a one-liner king. He had some wonderful one-liners. But the two major things that I remember he said about songwriting. At first I said, well, what do you think of what when I first met him in the early 70s, I said, what do you think about what I do? I said, do you like all this glam rock stuff, you know? And he said, yeah, it's great. Well, it's just rock and roll with lipstick on, isn't it? We're so right, in one way. And then later on we were talking about songs, and he said, you know, it's basically what you need to do with a song is say what you mean, put a rhythm to it, and put a backbeat to it, and that's it. And it really is as simple as that. And I understood that. I don't take that completely to heart because my way of working is not quite like that. But I do, if I'm getting stuck, if I'm in a corner with a song or a piece of work and I've blanked out and I can't approach it anywhere, I always go back to things that John said or things that Brian Eno said to me. I mean, he was also very helpful in terms of opening me up as a writer and changing my ideas about how I can write songs.
Mm-hmm. How so?
How so? With Brian particularly, the whole idea of using a recording studio as an instrument, of not necessarily thinking you have to be prepared totally before you go in, that accidents will happen, and sometimes planned accidents work out really well. If there's a bad note, you can layer that note several times with other instruments, and suddenly that bad note sounds like an extraordinary piece of arrangement. Those kind of things that are real, I guess. Brian is marvelous at the obvious. He'll say an obvious thing, but you would never have thought of it before.
Okay, can we talk about your movies for a little bit quickly? I mean, you play so many different roles in your films, but I'm wondering what to you is the thread running through them all?
I initially, firstly, 90% of the time I've only ever taken a role on. Firstly, it's a reasonably good role, but primarily because of the director involved, because I wanted to see how he worked. And what his chemistry was with the relationships with his crew, how he put things together. And that applies to just about every director that I've worked with, really. That's a thread. Mm-hmm. Character threads, I don't know. I like characters that are just slightly off the wall, I think.
Well, which one is the most like you and which one's the least like you? The
one that's most like me, I suppose the nerd in Blue Jean. I think there's a nerd busting out of me. I kind of felt very at one with the sneaky little gangster guy in Into the Night, the cameo thing that I did for John Landis. I've got great empathy with that character. The least like me, I guess, I hope anyway, is The Hunger. I felt very uncomfortable with that role, although I loved being involved in a Tony Scott movie. I thought Tony was tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And his second film being Top Gun, I thought, why did you give me your first film, Tony? But these things happen. I think the same thing will happen with Julian, by the way, on the Absolute Beginners thing, which I personally love. I think it's a great little movie. It's a very new approach to making movies, but the same thing will happen with Julian, is that frankly, Tony, nobody would touch him after The Hunger for years, and then suddenly he gets Top Gun. Now he's just done Beverly Hills 2. And the guy's like he's the biggest thing since sliced bread in America. And the same thing will happen with Julian. I know it. He'll make his next film, maybe not the next one, maybe the next one, and suddenly Julian will be on the map again, you know. It's such a fickle thing, the film thing.
Yeah, really.
It really is.
What did you learn from Nicolas Roeg?
Nick Roeg, I think, I still think he's the only director that I've worked with that the sum of the parts that he puts in, there is something greater that evolves out of what... His work has a certain alchemy, a certain chemistry in it that I've never really seen with any of the other directors I've worked with. There's some kind of magic ingredient that he puts in. His combinations of his quick shots and quick flashes, when you build up his imagery, it focuses into another world. He creates this spatial area between reality and a spiritual life, and he puts you somewhere in the middle. The nearest I've really seen to it in that terms of magic is David Lynch, who I admire very much indeed, and Alex Cox I like a lot. I think Alex Cox is just tremendous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, The way you look now,
Yeah.
the leather jacket and everything, it's really nice. Why are you looking like this these days?
I think you've got to be pretty emphatic and upfront and forward about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to say in rock and roll. It's a people's culture, so I don't think it's too wise to be too clever. I'm going to do a rock and roll tour this year. The only statement that I can make visually with clothes that is not fashion is this. This is totally it's timeless. I feel very comfortable in it, doing what I'm doing, writing the music that I'm writing. And of course I've always worn this jacket.
Okay, now the Beatles. How much did the Beatles affect the way you looked and dressed back in the early to mid-'60s?
Not at all. I wasn't a Beatles clothes fan at all. No, I never. I was more into like the Who and all that. I mean, I was very much a mod in the '60s. You know, it was all hair and the right Fred Perry T-shirts and the length of the trouser had to be just so and all that. I mean, it was all very sort of French, which the mods really came. The whole mod look in England came out of French fashion, and at that time was really good for guys. French fashion and Italian fashion. But it became like the mod look. So I was much more into that than I was into sort of Beatle jackets and stuff.